Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Daniel Ricciardo to AlphaTauri is not the only shocking move that Red Bull are working on at the moment, with very good sources saying that in the previous weeks they have had conversations with both Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc about a potential partnership with Max Verstappen in the next couple of years. Their intention is to create a dream team of drivers, and it's not just their plan, but it's Liberty Media's plan, the owners of the sport, to try and push the teams to do this to ensure the seasons are more entertaining, even if one car is dominating. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, this is the Williams Golf inspired livery. They revealed yesterday they will be running this for 3 Grand Prix this season. They had that beautiful one, of course, for Silverstone with the Union Jack on the back. But this is what they're going to run in Singapore, Japan, and for Qatar. So very nice stuff. There's also, we've got to talk Daniel Ricciardo because this was noted on the F1 Instagram page, and I'm still a little bit unsure why they haven't said anything about Nick de Vries. Even when Scuderia AlphaTauri confirmed in their press release that Ricciardo was returning, they didn't really say goodbye thanks to Nick. Only Franz Tost of AlphaTauri, who is just there to sit by and have a few beers, I guess, because he clearly doesn't make any decisions. Helmut Marko makes the calls in terms of what's going on with their drivers, but he was like, oh, thanks Nick for your time, and unfortunate the way it worked out, but wishing you all the best. Nobody else has said anything. Like, the entire Instagram page is just filled with Daddy Rick, and it makes sense, but I feel a bit bad for Nick de Vries here, really. Turns out his best time from yesterday's test was actually not within 2 or 3 tenths of max. It was actually a 1:27.4, but of course various different conditions, fuel load, tyres, all this stuff has a part to play in that. And Red Bull obviously thought that this time was, given those varying conditions, was within the right ballpark to be deemed very competitive, and that's what Christian Horner said. He said Ricciardo was very competitive in the testing that he did yesterday, to such an extent that it took them approximately 1 hour to make the decision. This is actually unreal to me that Red Bull operate in this way, and they clearly were prepared in some respect to bring Ricciardo in for de Vries, but they apparently hadn't. I thought they'd made that decision before the testing, right? Because you'd have thought they would have done, but apparently not. They waited for Ricciardo to do some laps in the car. 1 hour into the test, Horner calls Marko up apparently, and this is not just a random source saying this. ESPN are saying this is what happened yesterday. Horner calls up Helmut Marko to say, hey, Daniel's looking good, it's time to get him in the car. Then Marko goes back and basically fires de Vries on the spot. I don't think Nick saw it coming, I don't imagine, but that's what happened. Marko calls up de Vries, says, yep, you're out of the car, Danny Rick's coming in, and then I imagine Daniel Ricciardo was informed by potentially Sebastian Vettel, who was also there later in the day, and might be the replacement to Marko down the line, that, Ricciardo found out later in the day that he'd got the seat. So de Vries' team then told Dutch journalists that this was happening, and it was then revealed, and therefore Red Bull had to put out the announcement themselves, and maybe that's why there's been some delay on saying goodbye to de Vries, because they had to clarify these reports before the media ran wild with it, and everyone was expecting an announcement, which eventually came. They weren't planning to do this for some time, but yeah, they made the call yesterday during the tyre test. Like, it seems like Red Bull are so all over the shop at times nowadays. They hired de Vries on a whim after one good race in Monza, and 1 hour into testing, they're like, yep, Danny Rick's got it again, let's bring him back in. I don't think they've made the wrong decision. I like this decision, but it's just remarkable that they seem to be operating in this way. And as I say, these are sources telling ESPN this, so it probably is happening. This, though, was also spotted today. Well, this is a cafe in Monaco. I actually found where this is precisely on Google Maps if you guys would like to do a bit of geodetective work. But it is Toto Wolff, and here is Nick de Vries, of course, on the right-hand side. Former Mercedes driver from last year, Mercedes reserve driver, but now they've got Mick Schumacher, they've got Vesti, they've got all sorts of characters over there. I don't know what's next for Nick de Vries, but, Toto Wolff's just collecting these drivers that got fired, basically, and I don't know exactly, Toto Wolff seems, they're both on their phones in fairness, and I'm sure he's giving Nick de Vries the time of day, but I can't imagine that at this point Toto's going to go out of his way to try and secure him another seat in F1, because it's probably not going to happen at this point, let's be honest. Not sure what's next for de Vries, but here they are in Monaco today, discussing, I'm sure, what's happened over the last 24 hours. This is the plan for Red Bull as as well, they really want to compare how does Ricciardo stack up to Yuki Tsunoda. I think Yuki is underestimated by a lot of people. The AlphaTauri is not the easiest car to drive, and that's the thing. If Daniel Ricciardo was put into the Red Bull, I think he would do a better job than Perez personally, but in the AlphaTauri, it's a difficult car. I don't know if he's going to have a good time there. Yuki has proven that it's possible to get good results, and then Helmut Marko also says, why wait around to fire De Vries? We expected him to be on pace with Tsunoda. He was always 3/10 slower. No improvement was happening. He's a nice guy, but the speed just wasn't there. There is also talk, though, that Red Bull are changing their direction in terms of their junior team. With Oliver Mintzlaff, who's now in charge after the passing of Dietrich Mateschitz, he's changing the plan to some degree in terms of the way the junior program is run and taking some power away from Helmut Marko to make all these decisions. That seems to be the plan. They're trying to streamline things. They currently have around about 12 juniors across all sorts of categories. F2, F3, Super Formula. They've got drivers everywhere, and not many of them seem that promising, to be honest. So it seems like they want to just narrow this down. Only have a few drivers that they support, but those are the real top drivers that they can see being F1 drivers or even Max Verstappen partners in the future. But speaking of Max Verstappen and partners, this is where we're getting into the dream team concept that a lot of the top teams will be going for, it seems. So in the previous few weeks, both Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc have been approached by Red Bull as a possibility to sign one of those drivers in 2025, probably. Now, 2024, Checo Perez is still on a deal. Now, will that be maintained? Will they bring in Danny Rick? Will they bring in somebody else? I don't know. But for 2025 and beyond, they're looking at bringing in, effectively, a better driver. And this would be incredibly exciting for the sport if we were to get anything to this effect. It's kind of what Mercedes have done, to be honest, and it's the reason why Mercedes are P2 in the Constructors. Having Hamilton and Russell there, yes, if there was a title fight, those two would be going head to head. If their car was good enough to fight for the championship, it would be very entertaining, even if that was the only good car on the grid, as let's say was the case back in 2016 with Hamilton and Rosberg. But the philosophy has kind of been over the last few years, especially from Red Bull. All right, we'll have Max, we'll have a support driver, effectively is the way they see Perez, I'm sure, and that's how we're going to set up our team. And it's great for the success of Max and for the success of their team. But in theory, if other teams are going to catch up, as they will in due course, in order for Max to win the drivers, he's going to need some help from a teammate, you would think, and also for Red Bull to win the Constructors consistently, as Mercedes and theoretically Ferrari and maybe Aston, once they have Honda as a partner and they're kind of a works team, can get better and better. Red Bull are probably going to need to go the Mercedes route of having two primary drivers. Now, the team will still be built around Max to some degree, and the relationship and the chemistry there is, I'm sure, magnificent, and it's very difficult to see any driver coming in alongside Max and really, taking the challenge and beating him right now. But if there are two drivers of the next generation of which are capable of that, these are two of the drivers. Russell, of course, is at Mercedes. The other two, to me, are Leclerc and Norris. And this isn't just random sources. Giuliano de Kessler has put his name to this, very closely tied to Ferrari, and he's ratifying that indeed this has occurred. So all while doing all this Ricciardo stuff, they're trying to form a dream team in 2025 or 2026. And this is the additional part, is that it's not just the will of Red Bull to do this, probably because at some point they feel like, well, we need a better second driver so we can consistently win the Constructors, as I just mentioned, if their car is good enough to do so. But it's also the intention of the sport itself. Now, back in the Bernie Ecclestone days, he used to talk to teams and try and get them to sign certain drivers if it was going to be better for the sport. It's not a new thing, but it is interesting that Liberty Media, the owners of Formula One, are trying to convince the top teams to do this, to have two competitive drivers. They want every season to be good. And even, you look at 2014, you look at 2016 as two examples, when there was a dominant Mercedes car. Those seasons were still very entertaining because there was at least a championship battle for the win. There were fights for the race wins. And I think nowadays we've got somewhat accustomed to seeing races where there's a great battle for second place and you're like, wow, what a good race. But Max Verstappen wins anyway. And it's not quite the same as when you've got two drivers on a similar level in the same car that might be dominating in terms of, making for a competitive championship, it's difficult to create what happened in 2021, where you've got two teams, two drivers pushing each other to the limit, similar performance over the course of the season, and just a great scrap with the controversial ends. But the intention would be that if there is a dominant car, as is always likely to emerge in Formula 1, at least we get a championship fight. That's what Liberty Media want to ensure, and they have seemingly been talking to all the top teams. Mercedes have already effectively done this, right? And as I say, that's probably why they're second in the constructors, rather than Aston Martin that have had on average the stronger car, but Stroll has been nowhere relative to Alonso. So the owners of the sport want this to happen with all the top teams, and therefore they may well be pushing for Red Bull to get one of these two guys. Helmut Marko has described Norris as the best young driver on the grid, and a Norris-Verstappen partnership would be fantastic, but also Leclerc-Verstappen would be really interesting to see. Leclerc, I think, would have the measure of Verstappen, at least has a chance to have the measure of Verstappen in qualifying pace. I think he's the fastest driver over a lap on the entire grid, and stick him in the Red Bull next to Max, that would be really interesting what would happen in qualifying. Do I think Leclerc could outperform Verstappen in race trim and also in terms of consistency over the season? I'm not so sure. And going into Red Bull, you're going into the lion's den to some degree. Verstappen and Red Bull, they have that great chemistry, that great relationship. The car is designed for his preferences and for good reason. But would it be entertaining? Yes. Would it be the best decision for Norris or Leclerc? It's difficult to say. There's always the question of, okay, well, if Hamilton retires, the Mercedes seat might be open. Norris also, part of him might think, well, what if McLaren make big progress over the next couple of years with their recent results? I've not been so convinced they're going to do that, just because even from 2026, McLaren is still going to be a Mercedes customer team, and surely at some point, either next year or in the next 2 to 3 years, Mercedes figure what they're doing out, and they once again put a gap that they should have over their customer teams in McLaren and in Aston Martin until 2026, when Aston Martin partner with Honda. So they seem to realise that it's not going to be easy to get Leclerc or Norris, but that's what they want to do. Vasseur is going to try and lock down Leclerc to Ferrari to prevent him leaving. Makes sense. Norris, his contract will be up. I don't think he's going to sign an extension on that one anytime soon, and Liberty Media wants this to happen to ensure that if there is a dominant car, we at least still have some entertaining fights for race victories. This would be very entertaining. What do you guys think? Is it likely? Would Leclerc do this? Would Norris do this? Should they do this, right? Rather than join another team? Because when you team up with Max at Red Bull, it usually only ends one way. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.